For Labor Day weekend, my family kept telling me not to make any plans. Just wait. My mother, Beatrice, had smiled, patting my hand with her perfectly manicured fingers. The morning of the trip, I woke up completely alone in our quiet Atlanta house. By noon, I saw my younger sister Simone post an Instagram story. It was a family trip to Martha's Vineyard entirely without me. The caption read, "Best trip ever when she is not around," followed by a laughing face. I did not react. I did not shed a single tear. I just waited. 7 days later, my phone lit up with 79 missed calls and a frantic message from my mother, begging me to please come home, because they simply did not know. Before I tell you how a holiday weekend destroyed my toxic family, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Please like and subscribe if you have ever faced family members who severely underestimated your worth. My name is Kendra and I am 33 years old. I stood in the middle of my mother's pristine granite kitchen, staring at the empty espresso maker. For an entire month, she had practically ordered me to clear my schedule. "We are doing a family bonding trip," she had promised, flashing her flawless pageant smile. She insisted there would be no laptops and no work emails, just us connecting as a family. But the house was dead silent. There was no luggage left in the hallway, and there were no voices echoing from the upstairs bedrooms. There was only a square yellow note left on the kitchen island. It read, "Emergency trip for Harrison and his family business. So sorry. Make yourself some eggs. Love, Mom." Harrison is my younger sister Simone's husband. He comes from old Boston money, or at least that is the narrative my mother forces down the throat of everyone in her elite social circles. I was reaching for the coffee canister when my phone buzzed loudly against the marble countertop with a new notification. Simone had posted a public update. It was definitely not an emergency business trip. It was a high-definition video of them clinking crystal champagne flutes on a private ferry heading to Martha's Vineyard, the ultimate summer playground for wealthy billionaires. The camera panned over to my mother, laughing loudly, then shifted to Harrison, who proudly held up his glass to the lens. That was when I read that brutal caption. They did not just leave me behind, they orchestrated a complete decoy to ditch me. My phone vibrated again, almost slipping out of my hand. It was a text message from Harrison accidentally sent to our main family group chat, instead of just to his wife. I opened it and read the words that would change everything. "Thank God your sister actually stayed home," he wrote. "My parents could not handle another dinner explaining why your sister wears basic suits instead of designer brands, because she is a social liability and a complete buzzkill." Before he could realize his mistake and unsend it, I took a screenshot. That singular text message summed up my entire life in just 2 sentences. While Simone was always the golden child, pledging the right sorority, winning the right pageants, and marrying a white guy with a yacht to elevate our family status, I was always cast as the boring sister who studied corporate finance. I vividly remember my 28th birthday standing in this exact kitchen. My mother had handed me a cheap $50 gift card, then turned around and handed Simone a massive check for $40,000 to fund her influencer lifestyle brand. "Simone needs to look the part to secure her future," my mother had told me, brushing off my shock. "You work in a cubicle, Kendra, so you will be perfectly fine." I did not cry that day either. Instead, I remembered the stark contrast of my college graduation just a few years prior. I had graduated summa cum laude with a dual master's degree in finance and economics. My mother had skipped the commencement ceremony entirely because Simone had a minor fitting for a local strawberry festival pageant on the exact same afternoon. When I returned home with my heavy-framed diploma, Beatrice barely glanced at it, casually suggesting I hang it in the hallway closet so it wouldn't clash with her interior decor. It was at that precise moment I realized seeking their validation was a fool's errand. I stopped trying to prove my worth and started quietly amassing my power. During my early years at Apex Equity, while I was aggressively climbing the corporate ladder and closing 8-figure acquisition deals, I deliberately maintained the mundane facade they expected of me. I bought my clothes off the rack. I drove a reliable, unassuming sedan. Whenever they asked about my job, I fed them boring stories about spreadsheets and middle management meetings. They were so consumed by their own superficial vanity that they never bothered to ask for details. When my mother complained about her mounting debts and the shrinking life insurance policy my father had left behind, I saw the perfect opportunity to trap her in her own greed. I set up a sophisticated blind trust and linked the infamous Platinum credit card to a dummy account funded strictly by my annual executive bonuses. I handed her the card under the guise that I had merely optimized Dad's old policy for better rewards. She snatched it from my hand without a word of gratitude, instantly assuming the limitless swiping power was her divine right. For 5 years, I silently paid for the very designer gowns she wore to events where she actively pretended I did not exist. I watched her build a magnificent towering castle entirely out of my money, knowing that I held the singular match that could burn it to the ground whenever I chose. I did not reply to the group chat after reading Harrison's cruel message. I did not call my mother to scream or demand an explanation. Instead, I calmly poured my morning coffee, walked over to the dining table, and opened my laptop. Because what my family and especially my arrogant brother-in-law did not know was exactly what my boring finance job actually entailed. I was not sitting in some low-level cubicle. I was a senior managing partner at Apex Equity. I took a deep breath, letting the anger wash over me and transform into pure cold focus. I knew exactly how my mother operated. She loved to project an image of immense wealth to keep up with Harrison and his family. To do that, she relied heavily on a platinum credit card she carried everywhere. She always assumed that specific card was funded by an old life insurance policy left behind by my late father. She had no idea that for the past 5 years, that supplementary card was tied directly to my personal executive account. Every expensive dinner, every designer dress, and every luxury vacation she flaunted was silently funded by the very daughter she constantly deemed a social liability. I logged into my secure banking portal, watching the screen load with a satisfying click. I navigated straight to the authorized users section. There it was, her platinum card already showing pending charges from a boutique on the island. Without a single ounce of hesitation, I clicked the deactivate button. A prompt appeared asking if I was sure I wanted to freeze this account immediately. I selected yes, effectively cutting off their entire financial lifeline with a single keystroke. I closed the laptop, took another sip of my coffee, and smiled to myself in the empty kitchen. They wanted to enjoy a glamorous holiday weekend without my presence, and now they were going to experience exactly what that looked like without my money. The real game had just begun for them. They would most definitely learn a very truly unforgettable lesson today. The sharp ring of my cell phone shattered the quiet solitude of my kitchen. I glanced at the glowing screen and saw the name Marcus flashing in bright white letters. Marcus was the elite property manager who oversaw my real estate portfolio, including my most prized asset, a sprawling beachfront estate in Oak Bluffs on Martha's Vineyard. I picked up the phone expecting a routine monthly update on property maintenance or upcoming seasonal rentals. Instead, I heard the distinct sound of chaos in the background, a chaotic blend of loud music and shouting voices that immediately put me on edge. "Miss Davis, I sincerely apologize for calling you on a holiday weekend," Marcus said, his voice unusually tight and strained. "However, we have a significant situation escalating at your Oak Bluffs property. The guests who checked in this morning are completely ignoring the occupancy limits outlined in their rental agreement. They have brought an entire unauthorized film crew onto the premises for social media content. Furthermore, they are aggressively demanding the access code to your private temperature-controlled wine cellar. They are threatening to leave terrible reviews if we do not comply with their demands." I leaned against the marble counter, my mind connecting the dots with lightning speed. "Marcus, please tell me the exact full name on the primary reservation file," I requested, though I already knew the answer. The reservation was booked under a corporate account, but the primary guest identified himself as Harrison Sterling. Marcus replied, his frustration evident even through the phone speaker. His mother-in-law, a woman named Beatrice, has been ordering my staff around like personal servants since the very moment they arrived. They keep boasting about their elite status and how they expect the absolute highest level of pure luxury treatment. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face as the beautiful irony of the situation settled over me. My mother, my sister Simone, and her arrogant husband Harrison had rented a $25,000 a night estate to impress Harrison's parents. They were desperately trying to show off the absolute peak of black excellence seamlessly blending with old white money. They desperately wanted to project a perfect image of untouchable generational wealth. But they had absolutely no idea that the anonymous corporate owner of that sprawling 8-bedroom mansion was the very same sister they had discarded. They were standing in my house, sleeping in my beds, and demanding access to my private wine collection, all while they were laughing at my expense on public social media. Marcus, I need you to listen to me very carefully, I said, my voice steady and commanding. Let them unpack their designer luggage. Let them film their videos and post their selfies. Let them enjoy the grand illusion of wealth for a little while longer. But I want you to secure the wine cellar immediately. Change the digital passcode and disable the override feature. Under no circumstances are they allowed access to my private collection. If they complain, simply tell them the owner strictly forbids it. Understood, Miss Davis, Marcus responded, sounding slightly relieved by my calm directive. Should I inform them about who actually owns the property? I truly believe that would shut down their disrespectful behavior instantly. Not yet, I replied smoothly. Let them enjoy the illusion a little longer. Let them build their fragile house of cards. However, I want you to take one more action immediately. Contact the Islands Country Club and revoke the VIP guest passes associated with my property. Cancel their dinner reservations and invalidate their access to the private beach club. Tell the club manager that the current guests do not have the owner's authorization to utilize those exclusive privileges. I will handle that right away, Miss Davis, Marcus confirmed. They are going to be absolutely furious when they realize they cannot access the club, especially considering how much they have been bragging about their evening plans. Let them be furious, I said, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Thank you for the update, Marcus. Keep me informed of any further developments. I ended the call and set my phone down, marveling at the poetic justice unfolding before me. My family had left me behind because they believed I lacked the social capital to fit into their glamorous weekend. Now they were unknowingly playing house in a mansion I had purchased with the very corporate finance salary they constantly mocked. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, walked over to the large bay window in my living room, and looked out at the quiet Atlanta street. The profound peace and quiet they thought they had stolen from me was actually a tremendous gift. It finally gave me the uninterrupted time and mental clarity I needed to orchestrate their downfall. 2 hours later, my phone vibrated with an incoming text message. It was my mother finally deciding to check in and maintain her web of lies. Hey Kendra, I am so incredibly sorry once again about the sudden last-minute trip changes. Harrison's family really needed us for moral support here in the vineyard. We are roughing it in a basic rental house. I hope you are not too lonely at home. We will make it up to you, I promise. I stared at the message, disgusted by the effortless deception. She was sitting in a multi-million-dollar estate, featuring a home theater, an infinity pool, and a private beachfront, yet she claimed to be roughing it. She was spinning a narrative of sacrifice and modesty to justify leaving me behind. I quickly typed out my response, infusing it with just enough sharp sarcasm to satisfy my own amusement without revealing my hand. I am not lonely at all, Mom, I replied. I am actually having a truly wonderful and productive day. Enjoy the rental house. I hear the owner of that property is incredibly strict about fake wealth and unauthorized guests. Be careful out there. By dinner time, the absolute silence of my house was broken by the sharp ringing of my cell phone. I glanced at the screen and saw my sister's name flashing brightly. It was Simone. I let it ring 3 times before finally pressing the accept button, bringing the phone to my ear. I could immediately hear the distinct sounds of an upscale restaurant in the background. There was the soft clinking of expensive crystal glasses, the low murmur of wealthy patrons, and the unmistakable rushing of ocean wind. Kendra, hey, Simone whispered. Her voice was dripping with that fake sugary sweetness she always used whenever she desperately needed a favor. Listen to me. I need a really huge favor right now. My credit card is acting weird, and Harrison's dad apparently forgot his wallet back at the estate. We are currently eating at the Atlantic, and the bill is around $4,500. Can you wire me the money immediately? I promise I will pay you back as soon as we return. I might even buy you a plane ticket to join us tomorrow so you do not feel so left out. I leaned back against the plush fabric of my living room sofa, taking a slow sip of the fresh tea I had just brewed. Wait a minute, Simone, I replied, keeping my tone completely even. Mom explicitly told me you guys were just roughing it in a basic rental house for the weekend. Why exactly are you eating at a $4,500 dinner? And more importantly, why cannot Harrison's incredibly wealthy parents simply cover the check? I thought they were old money. Shut up and just send the money, Kendra. The fake sweetness vanished in an instant, quickly replaced by her usual toxic venom. Her voice dropped to a frantic, angry hiss. We are trying to secure a massive financial bailout from a major private equity firm for Harrison's father. Mom has been trying to cover all the expensive bills to make it look like we are absolute equals, but her Platinum American Express card just got declined in front of everyone. That is so incredibly embarrassing for you, Simone, I said smoothly, enjoying the raw panic radiating through the phone speaker. Especially since you are sitting right in front of Harrison's elite parents. Did your perfect husband not clearly state in the group chat that my basic off-the-rack suits were a massive social liability? I would really hate to ruin your exclusive coastal vibe with my boring corporate cubicle money. You froze the credit card, Simone shrieked, no longer bothering to hide the rising hysteria in her voice. I could faintly hear my mother gasping in the background, likely clutching her pearls in absolute horror. Kendra, you vindictive. We are currently sitting at a table with the senior vice president of Harrison's company. If we cannot pay this ridiculous seafood bill, his entire family will be thoroughly humiliated. A 30-year-old former beauty queen having to scrub pots and wash dishes in a custom designer dress does sound like a genuinely fantastic social media update, I replied, refusing to give her an inch of sympathy. Make sure you use the exact same caption you used earlier today. Best trip ever. Have a wonderful night, Simone. Tell Mom I said hello. Kendra, do not you dare hang up on me, Simone screamed, but I had already pressed the red button. I tossed the phone onto the cushion next to me and laughed aloud. The real game had not even truly started yet, because my panicked sister had just confirmed exactly why they were really spending Labor Day weekend in Martha's Vineyard. Harrison's seemingly perfect, untouchable family was not just wealthy and casually vacationing. They were completely drowning in massive corporate debt, practically bankrupt, and acting out of pure, unadulterated desperation. They had explicitly arranged a high-stakes meeting at the island to beg for a $50 million corporate lifeline. I walked over to my home office and opened my laptop, pulling up the confidential files on my secure server. My mind was racing, connecting the desperate pieces of information Simone had just carelessly handed to me. If Harrison's father was seeking a massive bailout from a private equity firm, there were only a handful of institutions that handled that specific level of distressed corporate debt. I typed his family's shipping and logistics company name into our internal tracking database. The search results populated instantly, and my jaw nearly dropped. There it was, clear as day. Harrison's family business was currently listed as an active high-priority distressed asset file within my own firm's system. They were completely underwater, defaulting on dozens of major loans and desperately seeking a total restructuring package. They were relying entirely on my mother's fabricated wealth to project an image of combined generational stability. They needed to convince the investors that they had strong, wealthy allies backing them up. My mother was using my hard-earned money to fund a theatrical performance of Black excellence, all to save a white family that looked down on us. They had discarded me because I did not fit their glamorous aesthetic, totally unaware that the boring sister they left behind held the absolute power to save or destroy them. I printed the financial summary reports, the stark black and white numbers detailing their impending ruin. They were trapped in a ridiculously expensive seafood restaurant right now, forced to face the immediate consequences of their arrogance. The restaurant manager would not care about their alleged social status or their designer clothing when the bill remained unpaid. They would have to leave an expensive watch, call a local friend, or genuinely face the local authorities. I pictured my mother stripped of her platinum card, desperately trying to explain the situation to the wealthy in-laws she worshipped. It was a flawless, poetic justice. The night had truly ruined them. I sat at my desk, the glow from my laptop screen illuminating the dark room. While my family was undoubtedly experiencing the most humiliating evening of their lives at that seafood restaurant, I had my own work to complete. The financial summary reports I had just printed were only the absolute tip of a massive iceberg. I needed to dive much deeper into the exact details of Harrison's family business, known formally as Sterling Logistics and Freight. I accessed the secure server of Apex Equity once again, navigating past the initial firewall to reach our highly confidential corporate restructuring files. The more I read, the more I understood the sheer magnitude of their absolute desperation. Sterling Logistics was not just experiencing a temporary dip in quarterly profits. They were facing total irreversible annihilation. According to the internal documents uploaded by our preliminary risk assessment team, the company had massively overleveraged themselves during the pandemic. They had purchased a fleet of expensive cargo ships on credit, anticipating a permanent surge in global shipping rates. When the market inevitably corrected itself, they were left holding hundreds of millions in high-interest debt. Their primary creditors were already threatening to seize their physical assets, including the massive warehouse facilities that served as their operational hubs. They had exactly 30 days to secure a cash injection, or they would be forced into involuntary bankruptcy. I scrolled down to the meeting schedules attached to their specific file. My eyes widened as I read the upcoming appointments. The Sterling family had bypassed our junior analysts entirely and leveraged an old networking connection to secure a direct pitch meeting with the senior partners of Apex Equity. The location for this critical high-stakes presentation was listed right there on the screen. It was not scheduled at our sleek corporate headquarters in Boston. Instead, the meeting was confirmed for this upcoming Tuesday morning to be held at a private luxury beachfront estate in Oak Bluff's Martha's Vineyard. The sheer audacity of their plan left me temporarily speechless. Harrison and his parents had intentionally rented my property to host this incredibly crucial financial meeting. They specifically chose a location that screamed generational wealth and untouched prosperity. They wanted to project an atmosphere of absolute stability to the Apex Equity executives, hoping that an extravagant setting would distract the investors from the bleeding balance sheets of their failing shipping empire. And to complete this elaborate theatrical illusion of immense power, they had brought my mother and sister along to play the roles of wealthy, influential allies. They were utilizing my mother's perceived financial clout to validate their own sinking social standing. I leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair, letting out a sharp, incredulous laugh. They were completely unaware that the very private equity firm they were begging for a $50 million bailout was currently managed by the exact same woman they had deemed a social liability. They had actively excluded me from this trip because they believed my basic suits and corporate finance career would ruin their glamorous aesthetic. They thought I was just a boring, middle-class worker who would embarrass them in front of the wealthy white in-laws. They had no idea that I held the absolute power to single-handedly approve or deny the massive corporate lifeline they so desperately needed. I opened my email client and drafted a quick, highly confidential message to my executive assistant, Marcus, who handled all my corporate travel and meeting logistics. I instructed him to clear my entire schedule for Tuesday morning. I then sent a direct communication to the junior partners assigned to the Sterling Logistics file. I informed them that I would personally be handling the final assessment and pitch meeting for this specific client. I explicitly ordered them to keep my involvement strictly confidential until the very moment the meeting commenced. I did not want Harrison or his parents receiving any advance warning about who they would be facing. Once the corporate emails were sent, I turned my attention back to the printed financial reports resting on my desk. I grabbed a red pen and began circling the most damning figures: the defaulted loan notices, the depreciating asset valuations, and the alarming lack of liquid capital. I wanted to be perfectly prepared for Tuesday. I wanted to know every single weakness in their business model, every single lie they had told their creditors, and every single desperate move they had made to stay afloat. I was going to dismantle their entire presentation piece by piece, using their own fraudulent numbers against them. As I reviewed the documents, my phone remained completely silent. It seemed that my mother and sister were too busy dealing with the fallout of their declined credit card to bother calling me back with more insults or demands. I could only imagine the furious arguments echoing through the halls of my beachfront estate right now. Harrison's parents were likely demanding answers about the unpaid dinner bill, while my mother was desperately trying to invent a plausible excuse for why her limitless wealth had suddenly evaporated. The pristine, unified facade they had carefully constructed was already cracking under the immense pressure of their shared deception. I spent the next 3 hours meticulously preparing my strategy. I gathered all the necessary legal paperwork required to formally reject a bailout request and initiate asset seizure protocols. I printed the official Apex Equity denial forms, leaving the final signature line blank, waiting for the perfect dramatic moment to authorize their financial doom. I also printed a copy of the property deed for the Oak Bluffs estate, clearly showing my name as the sole legal owner. I wanted to ensure that when I finally confronted them, I had undeniable physical proof of my absolute power over both their professional and personal lives. By the time I finally closed my laptop, the clock on my wall showed it was well past midnight. My house was incredibly quiet, but it no longer felt like a lonely silence. It felt like the calm before a massive destructive storm. I gathered the organized stack of documents and placed them carefully into my leather briefcase. I was ready. I had spent my entire existence stepping aside, constantly dimming my own brilliant light, just so my highly toxic relatives could comfortably shine in their fake social circles. That exhausting era of profound submission was now officially, permanently, and spectacularly over. The upcoming Tuesday was going to be the most satisfying day of my entire career, and undoubtedly the worst day of their lives. Tuesday morning arrived with a crisp, invigorating chill in the air. I bypassed my usual corporate attire, opting instead for a custom-tailored midnight blue Tom Ford suit. It was a power suit designed specifically to project absolute, unwavering authority. I grabbed my leather briefcase, locked the front door of my Atlanta house, and climbed into the waiting black car. My driver navigated the morning traffic with practiced ease, taking me directly to the private executive terminal at the airport. There were no crowded security lines or delayed commercial flights for me today. A sleek twin-engine private charter jet was already idling on the tarmac, waiting exclusively for my arrival. I boarded the aircraft, greeted the flight attendant by her first name, and settled into the plush leather seat. As the jet lifted off the runway, banking sharply toward the northeast, I opened my briefcase and pulled out the thick stack of financial dossiers. I had a 2-hour flight to Martha's Vineyard, and I intended to use every single minute to perfect my execution strategy. The documents resting on my lap painted a picture of total financial devastation. Harrison's father, Winston, had built a reputation as a shrewd logistics titan, but the paperwork revealed a man who was entirely out of his depth. The family shipping empire was bleeding cash at an unprecedented rate. They had leveraged their generational wealth to the absolute limit, putting up their historic Boston brownstones and their massive shipping yards as collateral for a series of high-risk, high-interest loans. When global supply chain demands unexpectedly shifted, their entire revenue stream completely evaporated. I traced my finger down the final page of the asset seizure protocol. If Apex Equity did not grant them the $50 million bailout they were begging for today, the banks would initiate foreclosure proceedings by Friday morning. Winston and his arrogant family would lose absolutely everything: their luxury vehicles, their sprawling properties, and their carefully guarded social standing would vanish in a matter of days. They were not just facing bankruptcy, they were facing total social annihilation. I flipped to the section detailing their current liquidity. It was almost laughable. They had less than $50,000 in accessible cash across all their corporate accounts. That explained exactly why my mother had been forced to use my platinum credit card to pay for their extravagant dinners and luxury excursions on the island. Harrison had brought his wealthy parents to my estate precisely because he could not afford to rent a single hotel room on his own. He was a complete fraud, masking his impending ruin behind my family's stolen money. The sheer entitlement required to insult my clothing and my career while secretly living off my credit card was staggering. I closed the heavy folder, feeling a massive surge of pure adrenaline pulse fiercely through my veins. I was about to drop a nuclear bomb on their fragile glass house. The absolute irony of the Sterling family's situation was not just that they were broke, it was how they became broke. Winston Sterling was a dinosaur operating in a modern digital age. As I reviewed the internal audit files provided by my risk assessment team, the sheer arrogance of his business strategy was staggering. Instead of modernizing their logistics software or investing in automated warehouse technologies, Winston had funneled millions into acquiring vintage cargo vessels to maintain the traditional old-world aesthetic of his shipping empire. He wanted to look like a maritime titan of the 1920s, completely ignoring the fact that global supply chains had evolved. When fuel prices skyrocketed and modern competitors undercut their delivery times by half, Sterling Logistics started hemorrhaging capital. Desperate to hide his failures from his elite peers in Boston, Winston turned to private, unregulated lenders with astronomical interest rates. He essentially took out payday loans disguised as corporate mezzanine financing. What Winston absolutely did not know, and what I had personally orchestrated 6 months ago, was that Apex Equity had quietly purchased all of that toxic debt from those private lenders for pennies on the dollar. I had specifically targeted his portfolio long before Simone even sent me her wedding invitation. I owned their debt. I held the master keys to their warehouses. The $50 million bailout they were begging for today wasn't just to save their company. It was a desperate plea to stop Apex Equity from liquidating their entire bloodline's legacy. They had rented my house using my mother's stolen money to impress the very firm that was actively holding the financial guillotine over their heads. Winston thought he was walking into a negotiation with equal peers. He had no idea he was walking into a meticulously designed slaughterhouse and I was the butcher. My phone buzzed loudly against the polished mahogany tray table, interrupting my focused thoughts. I glanced at the glowing screen and saw a new text message from my mother. It was exactly the kind of toxic, highly manipulative communication I had grown to expect from her. "Good morning, Kendra," the lengthy message began. "I just wanted to check in quickly and make absolutely sure you are not planning any surprise visits to the island today. We have incredibly important guests arriving at the estate for a massive corporate meeting. Harrison's family is relying on us to project a flawless image of elite wealth. I know you sometimes struggle with basic social cues, but please just stay away and do not ruin their elite weekend. We simply cannot afford any embarrassing distractions right now. I will buy you a nice souvenir when we get back home." I read the message twice, marveling at the sheer, unadulterated audacity of her words. She was actively ordering me to stay away from my own $12 million property. She was calling me an embarrassing distraction while she was desperately playing house in a mansion I had purchased with my own hard-earned money. She actually believed she was protecting a powerful dynasty, completely blind to the fact that she was currently tethered to a rapidly sinking ship. I picked up my phone and typed my response, keeping my tone perfectly pleasant and devoid of emotion. "Do not worry about me, Mom," I wrote confidently. "I am having a very productive morning here. I promise I will not do anything to ruin the incredible illusion you have all worked so hard to build today. Good luck with your highly important meeting." I hit send and immediately switched my phone to airplane mode. I did not want any further distractions. The flight attendant approached quietly, offering me a glass of sparkling water as the pilot announced our initial descent into Martha's Vineyard. I looked out the oval window, watching the pristine coastline and the sprawling coastal mansions slowly come into view below us. The island looked breathtakingly beautiful, serene, and entirely unwelcoming to anyone lacking immense wealth. It was the absolute perfect stage for the spectacular drama I was about to direct. I drank my water, carefully smoothed the lapels of my designer suit, and securely locked the foreclosure documents back into my briefcase. The jet touched down smoothly on the private runway, the heavy wheels kissing the tarmac with a soft, echoing screech. The childish game of pretend was officially over now. It was finally time to introduce them all to the harsh, unforgiving reality they had been trying to escape. I gathered my belongings, thanked the dedicated flight crew for their excellent service, and stepped out into the crisp, salty ocean air. My private driver was already waiting on the tarmac beside a gleaming black sport utility vehicle. I slid into the luxurious leather back seat, staring straight ahead at the road leading toward Oak Bluffs. The scenic drive along the coastal highway provided a brief moment of absolute tranquility before the impending storm. Sunlight reflected off the deep blue waters of the Atlantic, casting a brilliant glow over the sprawling mansions that lined the affluent streets of Oak Bluffs. As my driver navigated the winding roads, I mentally reviewed every single detail of the upcoming confrontation. I felt no lingering sadness, no residual guilt, and absolutely no hesitation. My family had spent my entire life treating me like a burdensome afterthought. Today, they were going to learn that actions have severe, irreversible consequences. The heavy wrought iron gates of my beachfront estate came into view. I instructed my driver to slow down as we approached the property line. Through the dark tinted windows of the sport utility vehicle, I observed the pathetic tableau unfolding on my expansive front porch. My mother Beatrice was nervously pacing back and forth, constantly smoothing the skirt of her overpriced designer dress. Simone stood next to her, checking her reflection in her phone camera and frantically adjusting her hair. Harrison and his parents, Winston and Caroline, were clustered near the massive oak front doors. They were all wearing their absolute best country club attire, desperately trying to project an aura of established generational wealth. They looked incredibly tense, constantly checking their luxury watches, anxiously awaiting the arrival of the senior partner from Apex Equity. They believed their financial salvation was merely minutes away. The heavy gates swung open, automatically recognizing the encrypted transponder in my vehicle. The tires crunched softly against the pristine cobblestone driveway as we slowly rolled toward the main house. The entire group on the porch suddenly froze. They watched the black vehicle approach with a mix of eager anticipation and sheer terror. This was the exact moment they had been waiting for all morning. My driver parked the car perfectly parallel to the grand stone staircase, quickly stepped out and opened my door. I took a deep breath, stepped out of the vehicle, and firmly adjusted my dark sunglasses. The absolute silence that fell over the front porch was entirely deafening. The eager, welcoming smiles completely vanished from their faces. My mother actually grabbed the wooden porch railing, as if her legs had suddenly lost the ability to support her weight. Harrison visibly flinched, his face draining of all color until he looked ashen and sickly. Simone took a step backward, her mouth hanging open in sheer disbelief. "Kendra," my mother stammered. She looked around frantically, her eyes darting toward the open gates. "What on earth are you doing here? How did you even get past the front gate security?" "We are waiting for the senior partner of Apex Equity to arrive for a highly confidential meeting." Before I could even open my mouth to respond, Winston stepped forward. He puffed out his chest completely, embodying the arrogant old money entitlement that his family was known for. "Listen here, young lady," he barked, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. "I do not know who you are or what kind of ridiculous stunt you think you are pulling right now, but you are trespassing on private property. We have rented this exclusive estate for an incredibly important corporate function. I demand that you get back into your rented car and leave the premises immediately before I call the local authorities to have you forcibly removed." Simone rushed down the first few steps, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. She grabbed my arm, attempting to aggressively shove me back toward the open door of the vehicle. "Are you completely out of your mind, Kendra?" she hissed through gritted teeth, keeping her voice low so her wealthy in-laws would not hear. "You are going to ruin absolutely everything. We are literally minutes away from securing a $50 million bailout for Harrison's family. You cannot just show up here wearing your basic corporate clothes and embarrass us. Get back in the car right now." My mother hurried down the stairs right behind her, nodding in furious agreement. "Simone is absolutely right, Kendra," my mother whispered harshly. "I told you specifically to stay home. Harrison's parents are already judging us, and your presence here is a complete social liability. You are going to blow our entire cover. Go wait at some cheap diner in town until our meeting is over, and maybe I will give you a little cash to buy yourself a nice souvenir." I gently but firmly brushed Simone's hand off my expensive jacket sleeve. I did not raise my voice and I did not break eye contact with my sister. "Do not ever put your hands on me again, Simone," I said smoothly. "And I highly suggest you lower your voice because you are currently making a massive fool of yourself." Caroline Harrison's mother crossed her arms over her chest and glared at me from the top of the porch. "Harrison, who is this extremely rude woman, and why is she interrupting our schedule?" she demanded loudly. "We do not have time to deal with lost tourists. The Apex Equity representative could be here any second now." Harrison looked like he wanted the ground to open up and swallow him whole. He swallowed hard, struggling to find his voice. "Mom, Dad, this is my wife's older sister, Kendra," he finally mumbled, looking completely mortified. Winston scoffed loudly, shaking his head in absolute disgust. "This is the sister you told us about, the one who works in some low-level corporate cubicle. Well, that explains the severe lack of basic manners and social etiquette. Beatrice, I thought you assured us that your other daughter was busy working in Atlanta. Why is she trespassing on our rented vacation property?" My mother pleaded. "I will handle this issue now. Kendra, leave this property immediately, or you are no longer my daughter." I stood perfectly still. I slowly removed my dark sunglasses. I was the executioner. I looked directly into my mother's wide, panicked eyes and offered a slow, chilling smile. I completely ignored her desperate threat about disowning me. Instead, I turned my attention fully back to Winston, who was currently puffing out his chest like a cornered peacock on the sprawling cedar deck. I gestured for my assistant, who had been standing silently by the black sport utility vehicle. He immediately walked up the stone steps, carrying the sleek leather briefcase I had prepared during my flight. I unclasped the silver lock, the sharp click, echoing loudly in the tense, salty ocean air. I pulled out a thick, legal-sized envelope and tossed it casually onto the glass patio table right in front of them. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. "Winston," I said, my voice cutting through the sound of the crashing waves. "You mentioned earlier that you rented this exclusive property through a corporate agency. You are absolutely correct. You signed a temporary lease agreement with a luxury holding firm. What your broker clearly failed to mention, however, is the actual name of the individual who owns that holding firm." I tapped the thick envelope with my index finger. "Go ahead and open it. It is the official property deed for this estate, fully notarized and registered with the county clerk." Winston stared at the envelope as if it were a live explosive. He hesitated, his legendary old money arrogance briefly faltering under my unwavering gaze. Caroline, unable to contain her impatient curiosity, snatched the envelope from the table and ripped it open. She pulled out the crisp legal documents, her eyes scanning the dense paragraphs. I watched her face transform in real time. The color completely drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking physically ill. Her perfectly manicured hands began to tremble violently, causing the heavy paper to rustle in the coastal wind. "What does it say, Caroline?" Winston demanded, his voice losing its booming authority. "Stop shaking and just read the document." Caroline looked up, her eyes darting frantically between my face and the paper in her hands. "Winston," she whispered, her voice cracking with sheer disbelief. "The document says the sole legal owner of this $12 million property is Kendra Davis. She owns the house, Winston. She owns the entire estate." "That is absolutely impossible," Simone shrieked, lunging forward to grab the documents out of Caroline's hands. My sister stared at the bold print, her eyes widening in absolute horror as she saw my name legally bound to the property she had been pretending to belong in. "This is a fake. This has to be a complete forgery. Mom, tell them she is lying. Kendra works a boring corporate job in a tiny cubicle. She makes $60,000 a year. There is no possible way she could ever afford a mansion in Martha's Vineyard." I shifted my gaze to Mother, who was currently clutching her chest as if experiencing severe palpitations. "Well, Mom," I said smoothly, enjoying the absolute devastation written across her face. "Are you going to tell them the truth, or should I? You have spent years intentionally feeding Simone and her arrogant husband this ridiculous fabricated narrative about my financial status. You actively diminished my career to make Simone look like the successful golden child. You desperately needed Harrison's wealthy family to believe Simone was the prize, so you painted me as the pathetic, socially awkward sister who could barely afford rent. I stepped closer to the patio table, leaning in slightly to ensure every single word landed with maximum impact. I never worked in a cubicle, Simone. While you were busy parading across pageant stages and hunting for a rich husband to fund your extravagant lifestyle, I was building an extremely lucrative career in private equity. I have spent the last decade managing billions of dollars in corporate assets, orchestrating massive global mergers, and acquiring high-value real estate portfolios. I bought this beachfront estate 3 years ago with my annual performance bonus. It is just one of 7 luxury properties I currently own outright across the country. Harrison looked like he was going to vomit right there on the pristine cedar deck. He stumbled backward heavily, leaning against one of the white wooden columns for physical support. "You own this house," he mumbled, his voice completely devoid of its usual condescending edge. "The private wine cellar, the infinity pool, the private beach access. All of this belongs to you." "Yes, Harrison, all of this belongs to the sister you called a social liability," I replied, my voice laced with lethal precision. "The same sister you claimed wears basic off-the-rack suits. The sister you literally thanked God for leaving behind in Atlanta because she would supposedly embarrass your highly sophisticated parents. It turns out the woman you consider a complete buzzkill is actually your incredibly wealthy landlord. And ironically, I am the only reason you are currently not sleeping on a park bench during this holiday weekend." Winston, desperately trying to salvage some shred of his shattered dignity, puffed out his chest once more. "Fine," he stammered, attempting to project authority, despite the massive humiliation he had just endured. "So you happen to own a nice piece of real estate. That does not change the fact that we have a highly critical confidential business meeting scheduled here today. We are expecting a senior executive from Apex Equity to arrive at any moment to discuss a massive $50 million corporate restructuring deal. I strongly suggest you take your little victory lap and leave the premises immediately so we can conduct our professional business in private." I could not contain the genuine bright laugh that escaped my lips. The absolute sheer delusion required to maintain his arrogance in the face of such overwhelming evidence was staggering. They were still clinging desperately to the false hope that some anonymous corporate savior was going to swoop in and rescue their failing shipping empire. I let the ocean breeze carry my laughter across the deck. Winston stood still, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscles twitching. His face was turning an unhealthy shade of crimson. He believed he could aggressively command me to leave my own property. I was desperately waiting for a mythical corporate savior to walk up the driveway and hand him a $50 million lifeline. He had no idea the savior he prayed for was the woman he had just insulted. "Winston," I said, replacing my amusement with freezing professionalism, "you do not comprehend the brutal reality of your situation. There is no other executive coming to save your failing shipping empire today. I am not just the owner of this real estate. I am the senior managing partner at Apex Equity. I am the sole decision-maker assigned to the Sterling Logistics restructuring file. You are looking directly at your judge, your jury, and your financial executioner." "That is a complete lie," Harrison shouted, his voice cracking like a terrified child. He pointed a shaking finger at my face. "Mom, Dad, do not listen to this woman. Kendra is a low-level financial analyst. Simone told me all about her miserable career. She works in a tiny cubicle in Atlanta. There is absolutely no way she is a senior partner at a billion-dollar private equity firm." I turned my unwavering gaze to my pathetic brother-in-law, watching him sweat through his expensive linen shirt. "Harrison, your wife is a former beauty pageant contestant who currently funds her influencer lifestyle using a supplementary credit card that I personally pay for every month. Do you truly believe she has the intellectual capacity to understand complex corporate hierarchy? She told you what my manipulative mother told her to say, admitting that the dark-skinned, unconventionally attractive sister holds the real financial power did not fit their precious narrative." Winston pulled a smartphone from his trouser pocket, his large hands trembling with poorly concealed panic. "I will not stand here and be insulted by an insolent woman." he barked, tapping aggressively on the glowing screen. I am calling the main corporate office of Apex Equity right this very second. I demand to speak with Richard Vance or one of the founding partners. I will personally see to it that you are fired for this disrespectful stunt before the sun goes down today. I gestured toward his cell phone with a polite, encouraging nod. Please be my absolute guest, Winston. Call the main office. Dial the direct executive line. Ask the receptionist for Richard Vance. However, I should probably inform you beforehand that Richard officially retired to the sunny Bahamas late last year. I purchased his majority partnership shares with my own capital. If you call the executive desk right now, my personal assistant Marcus will be the one answering the phone. Hi is the exact same man you were screaming at this morning about your revoked country club access. The smartphone slipped entirely from Winston's sweaty grip and clattered loudly onto the wooden deck, the screen shattering instantly. Caroline gasped dramatically, covering her open mouth with both hands in sheer shock. The horrifying, inescapable realization was finally setting in for the entitled Sterling family. I opened my black leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of financial documents, each officially stamped with the Apex Equity corporate seal. I dropped the massive file right on top of the property deed I had presented earlier, the loud smack echoing loudly. Let us thoroughly review your actual financial standing, shall we? I asked, casually flipping open the thick cover page to reveal the disastrous numbers. Sterling Logistics and Freight is completely irreversibly bankrupt. You have massively overleveraged your entire generational assets to purchase a fleet of cargo ships that are currently sitting totally idle in the commercial harbor. You are bleeding tens of millions of dollars every single fiscal quarter. Your primary corporate creditors are aggressively threatening to seize your physical warehouses by this Friday morning. You came to my firm begging on your hands and knees for a $50 million cash injection to stop the impending involuntary bankruptcy. Kendra, please, I am begging you. Beatrice whimpered, stepping forward with thick, dark tears streaming down her carefully contoured face. You are terribly embarrassing us in front of the Sterlings. If you really have this kind of massive wealth and corporate power, you owe it to this family to help us. We are your own flesh and blood. You must immediately approve their bailout package. I do not owe you absolutely anything, Mother, I replied coldly, not even bothering to glance in her desperate direction. And as for the proposed corporate bailout package, I have already made my final executive decision. I pulled a single crisp sheet of paper from the very back of the legal folder. It was the official Apex Equity Loan Denial Form. I pulled a heavy gold fountain pen from my inside jacket pocket, deliberately uncapped it, and signed my name with a series of sharp, decisive strokes. I slid the officially denied application across the glass patio table directly toward Winston's trembling hands. Your desperate request for a $50 million corporate restructuring loan is officially and permanently denied. I announced, my strong voice echoing with absolute terrifying finality. Apex Equity does not invest valuable capital into sinking ships captained by incompetent, arrogant leaders who blatantly insult our executives behind their backs. You cannot do this to us! Caroline screamed, her sophisticated, aristocratic composure completely and utterly shattering into a million tiny pieces. We will lose our historic home. We will lose our family company. We will lose our entire generational legacy. You are purposefully destroying our entire family out of petty, vindictive spite. I am not destroying your precious family, Caroline, I corrected her sharply, my tone absolutely devoid of any sympathy. Your incompetent husband destroyed your family with his terrible, reckless business decisions. Winston's face contorted into a mask of fury, but his anger was no longer directed at me. He whipped his head around to glare at his own son. You told me they were influential investors, Harrison. Winston roared, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. You promised me that marrying into this specific family would open doors to limitless black capital in Atlanta. You said Beatrice had deep pockets and a network that could save our company. Instead, you married the daughter of a fraud, and you single-handedly insulted the only woman on this entire island who possessed the actual power to save our generational legacy. Harrison backed away, his hands raised in a desperate, trembling surrender. Dad, I swear I had absolutely no idea, he pleaded, his voice cracking. Simone told me her family was loaded. Beatrice has been swiping a Platinum American Express card for the past 3 years. They paid for our lavish rehearsal dinner. They bought first-class tickets. They acted like they owned half of the city. I watched the chaotic scene unfold with immense satisfaction, slowly stepping back to stand beside my property manager. Marcus, I said, clearly ensuring my voice carried over their pathetic, crumbling domestic dispute. Please inform these unauthorized trespassers of the updated property guidelines. Marcus stepped forward, his posture rigid and professional. As per the strict terms of your corporate rental agreement, providing fraudulent financial disclosures constitutes an immediate breach of contract, Marcus announced, looking directly at Winston. Because Sterling Logistics is in active default, your lease is officially terminated as of this exact moment. You have exactly 1 hour to pack your belongings and vacate the premises entirely. If any of you are still standing on this estate in 61 minutes, I will have the local Oak Bluffs Police Department physically remove you for trespassing. You cannot be serious, Beatrice shrieked, tears ruining her expensive makeup. She rushed toward Winston, grabbing his tailored sleeve. Winston, please, you have to fix this. We can pool our resources. We can call my contacts in Atlanta. We are family now. Winston violently ripped his arm away from my mother's grasp, looking at her with absolute, unfiltered disgust. Get your hands off me, you delusional woman, he spat. You have no resources. You have no contacts. Your own daughter just proved that you are completely bankrupt. You have been parading around this island playing pretend, while my family faces complete financial ruin. He turned his venomous glare back to his son. Harrison, grab your mother and get your luggage. We are leaving this instant. We need to call the bankruptcy lawyers before the markets close. And as for you, Winston pointed a trembling finger at Simone, who was quietly sobbing against the wooden railing. Do not even think about getting in my car. You and your deceitful mother can find your own way off this island. Harrison, you cannot just leave me here, Simone cried out, lunging toward her husband. I am your wife, we just got married, I love you. Harrison looked at Simone, and the sheer contempt in his eyes was breathtaking. The charming, sophisticated facade he had maintained for years completely vanished. You love my money, Simone, Harrison sneered coldly. You loved the yacht and the country club and the designer bags I bought you. But now the money is gone, and thanks to your psychotic sister, my family is entirely destroyed. What exactly do you bring to the table now? Your mother's declined credit card. That was a bank error, Simone desperately lied, still clinging to the shattered illusion. My mother has plenty of money. Kendra is just jealous and trying to ruin my life. Oh, for heaven's sake, Simone, stop embarrassing yourself, I interrupted casually, leaning against the stone pillar. Tell him the truth. Tell your husband exactly why Mom's card was declined at that ridiculously overpriced seafood restaurant last night. Harrison snapped his head toward me, his brow furrowed in confusion. What are you talking about? About what happened last night. Your beautiful, sophisticated wife called me begging for $4,500, I revealed smoothly. She panicked because the platinum card Mom was using to fund this entire luxurious weekend finally stopped working. Do you want to know why it stopped working, Harrison? Because that card is directly linked to my personal executive banking account. I am the primary account holder. I pay the bills. I fund their lifestyle. I froze the account last night while you were all ordering lobster and pretending to be American royalty. Your wife is utterly broke. Your mother-in-law is a complete fraud. They have been surviving strictly on the generous charity of the very woman you called a social liability. The profound silence that followed my revelation was heavier than a physical blow. Harrison stared at Simone, his chest heaving as the humiliating reality fully registered in his mind. He had married her for her perceived social capital and financial connections, completely unaware that she was merely a shiny, empty shell subsidized by the sister he actively despised. You lied to me, Harrison whispered, his voice dangerously low. You told me your father left a massive life insurance trust. You told me your family was untouchable. Harrison, please, I can explain, Simone begged, reaching for him again. He violently slapped her hand away. Do not touch me. You are absolutely pathetic, Harrison yelled. My family is losing our entire legacy today, and I am shackled to a gold digger who does not even have her own gold. We are done, Simone. Do you hear me? We are completely done. Do not call me. Do not look for me. My lawyers will send the divorce papers to whatever cheap, miserable apartment you end up in. Harrison spun around and stormed into the mansion to pack his bags, his parents following closely behind him without a single backward glance. They abandoned my mother and sister on the porch. The oak doors of the mansion slammed shut behind Harrison and his parents. I stood on the cedar, the ocean breeze, whipping my hair across my face, and watched my mother and sister crumble. Simone sank to her knees on the wooden floorboards, her designer dress pooling around her. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving with loud sobs. Beatrice looked like a woman who had just watched her entire universe burn down. She stared blankly at the closed doors, unable to process the absolute devastation of her social empire. The grand illusion was dead. I turned to Marcus, who was standing nearby with a neutral expression. Marcus, ensure the Sterling family vacates the premises within the hour as discussed. I instructed, my voice calm and authoritative. Once they are gone, lock the security gates and change the access codes immediately. Under no circumstances are they allowed back inside. Marcus nodded briskly, turning to oversee the eviction process. I did not spare another glance for the weeping women on my porch. I turned around, walked through the sliding glass doors into my living room, and locked them behind me. The satisfying click of the deadbolts sounded like absolute victory. With the chaotic noise of my family finally eliminated, I took a slow, deliberate walk through the sprawling first floor of my home. The sheer disrespect they had for spaces they deemed beneath them was evident in every room. In the grand foyer, Simone had carelessly tossed a heavy, mud-stained designer trench coat over a priceless antique credenza, leaving a damp watermark on the polished mahogany. In the chef's kitchen, the marble countertops were littered with half-empty bottles of cheap mass-produced champagne, a hilarious revelation, considering the high-definition video of them clinking crystal flutes that Simone had posted to her followers. They had been drinking bottom-shelf liquor poured into my expensive baccarat crystal glasses to fake an image of untouchable luxury. I walked down the hallway toward the master suite, which my mother had audaciously claimed for herself. The king-sized bed was unmade sheets tangled in a frantic rush to pack. On the floor by the ensuite bathroom, I found a discarded fake designer handbag that Beatrice had clearly hidden from her wealthy in-laws, alongside a scattered pile of unpaid parking tickets registered to Atlanta. They had lived in my home for less than 24 hours, yet they had treated it with the careless entitlement of feral animals stumbling into a palace. I picked up the counterfeit bag and tossed it directly into the trash bin. The contrast between my serene, disciplined reality and their chaotic, fraudulent existence had never been starker. I signaled for my private housekeeping staff, who were already waiting on standby in the guest house. Sanitize everything, I instructed the head housekeeper. Remove every trace that they were ever here. I want this house smelling like ocean breeze and eucalyptus before the sun sets. As the staff moved in to erase the physical footprint of my toxic relatives, I finally felt the absolute sanctity of my space return. I walked over to the wet bar, poured myself a glass of sparkling water, and sank into the plush white sofa. The interior of my home was a sanctuary of peace, a stark contrast to the spectacular meltdown occurring outside. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I watched the chaotic scene unfold. Harrison emerged from the front doors dragging 2 designer suitcases. He marched down the stone steps, ignoring Simone, who reached out to grab his pant leg. He kicked his foot free, his face twisted in disgust, and loaded his bags into the sport utility vehicle. His parents followed behind, their noses turned up in disdain. They climbed into the vehicle, the tinted windows rolling up to shield them from the embarrassing spectacle of their former in-laws. The engine roared to life, and the vehicle accelerated down the cobblestone driveway. Simone scrambled to her feet, running after the car in her expensive high heels, screaming Harrison's name until her voice cracked. The vehicle did not even slow down. It sped through the wrought iron gates, leaving my sister and mother stranded alone at the curb with their matching luggage and shattered pride. They were officially exiled from the elite world they had sacrificed my mental health to infiltrate. I took a slow sip of my water, savoring the absolute perfection of the moment. I had not destroyed their lives. I simply forced them to live in the reality they had created. As I sat there enjoying the silence of my living room, my cell phone resting on the glass coffee table began to vibrate. It buzzed once, then twice, and then it erupted into a continuous symphony of notifications. The digital screen lit up the darkened room like a beacon. I leaned forward and picked up the device. The lock screen was completely overwhelmed with alerts. There were exactly 79 missed calls, all originating from my mother and sister. The text messages were flooding in so fast that my phone briefly froze. I unlocked the screen and opened the family group chat, the chat they had used to inadvertently insult me just a few days ago. The tone had drastically shifted from arrogant dismissal to unfiltered desperation. "Sasha, please pick up the phone right now," my mother had texted first. "We are standing outside the gates and the security guards will not let us back in. We do not have a car. We do not have any money for a hotel. You have to let us inside." A minute later, another message arrived. "Sasha, I am begging you. Harrison actually left me. He drove away and blocked my number. My marriage is completely ruined. Please open the door. I need my sister." That was from Simone. The messages continued to pour in a chaotic mix of pathetic begging and desperate emotional manipulation. "You cannot do this to your own flesh and blood," my mother wrote. "We are in the middle of an island. The sun is going down and it is getting cold. Please, Sasha, just let us sleep in the guest house for one night. We will leave first thing in the morning." "I will do whatever you want," Simone pleaded in a subsequent text. "I will publicly apologize to you. I will pay you back for the seafood dinner. Just please do not leave me out here on the street. I have absolutely nothing left." I read through every message with a detached clinical fascination. They were not apologizing for decades of emotional abuse. They were not expressing genuine remorse for treating me like a disposable burden. They were only apologizing because they were experiencing the uncomfortable consequences of their own actions. They were only begging because they were locked out in the cold, stripped of their stolen financial resources. If Harrison's family had received the bailout, my mother and sister would still be laughing at my expense, posting pictures of their elite vacation while mocking my corporate lifestyle. They were only sorry they got caught, and they were only desperate because I held the power. I placed the phone back on the coffee table and let it vibrate. I did not type a response. I did not answer their calls. I simply sat on my comfortable sofa watching the sunset paint the Martha's Vineyard sky in shades of orange and purple. For the first time in my life, I was not rushing to fix their mistakes. I was not shrinking myself to make them feel larger. I was not sacrificing my peace to subsidize their delusions. The 79 missed calls were not a tragedy. They were the sound of my absolute liberation. The heavy chains of familial obligation had finally been broken, and I was going to enjoy my freedom. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long dark shadows across the pristine coastline of Martha's Vineyard, my cell phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Marcus, my dedicated property manager. I answered on the first ring, anticipating a highly entertaining update regarding the two women I had just exiled from my estate. Marcus possessed a vast network of local contacts across the island, including private drivers, hotel concierges, and restaurant managers. In an exclusive, tight-knit community like Oak Bluffs, absolutely nothing happened without the local staff knowing about it. "Miss Davis, I thought you might appreciate a status report on your former guests," Marcus said, his professional tone barely masking his deep amusement. "The Sterling family departed the island via a private emergency charter flight approximately 20 minutes ago. However, your mother and sister were not permitted to board that aircraft. They were left standing on the curb with all of their designer luggage. They attempted to order a premium ride-share vehicle, but the application immediately rejected their payment method because it was linked to the frozen platinum card." I laughed softly, imagining my mother and Simone standing in their expensive silk dresses, completely stranded on the side of a coastal road as the evening temperatures began to plummet. Without my financial backing, their glamorous facade had evaporated into thin air. They were entirely powerless. "What did they do next, Marcus?" I asked, settling deeper into my plush living room sofa. "They had absolutely no choice but to walk," Marcus replied. "According to the security team stationed at the front gate, Beatrice and Simone dragged 6 massive heavy suitcases down the main road. They were wearing high heels, struggling against the ocean wind and actively arguing with each other the entire time. They eventually made their way to the Harbor Grand Hotel, fully expecting to secure a luxury suite for the night. The Harbor Grand was one of the most exclusive accommodations on the island, a place where rooms cost thousands of dollars and required reservations months in advance. "Please tell me the general manager was working the front desk tonight," I said, already knowing the answer. "He was," Marcus confirmed. "And he had already received the urgent alert I circulated to the local hospitality network regarding their revoked VIP status and their unpaid fraudulent restaurant bill from last night. When your mother confidently marched up to the reception desk and demanded their finest oceanfront suite, the manager politely asked for a valid credit card. She attempted to use the frozen platinum card again, followed by 2 of her own personal credit cards. All of them were declined due to insufficient funds. I could practically see the scene playing out in my mind. My mother, desperate to maintain her wealthy persona in front of the wealthy patrons in the hotel lobby, likely tried to leverage our family name or claim it was a ridiculous banking error. She demanded that the manager simply bill the room to her existing VIP account. Marcus continued, clearly enjoying the narrative. The manager informed her in front of a lobby full of elite guests that her VIP privileges had been permanently revoked by the primary sponsor. He also mentioned that the local police had been notified about an outstanding balance of $4,500 at a nearby seafood restaurant. Hai told them that unless they could produce a working credit card or a thick stack of physical cash, they needed to vacate the premises immediately. Simone started screaming at the front desk staff, throwing a massive tantrum, which only made the situation infinitely worse. The hotel security guards had to physically escort them out of the elegant glass doors and back onto the dark, cold street. The absolute poetic justice of their situation was intoxicating. My mother and sister had spent my entire life prioritizing social status over basic human decency. They had ruthlessly discarded me because they feared I would embarrass them in front of these exact same elite crowds. Now they were the ultimate social pariahs, publicly humiliated and permanently blacklisted from the very circles they had sacrificed my mental health to infiltrate. Where did they go after they were thrown out of the Harbor Grand? I asked, taking a slow, celebratory sip of my sparkling water. They wandered the island for another 2 hours, Marcus reported. Every single upscale hotel and boutique inn turned them away. They finally ended up at the Coastal Breeze Motel, a highly outdated, budget-friendly establishment on the far edge of town. It is the kind of place that caters to backpackers and seasonal workers. The motel clerk demanded payment up front. Since they had absolutely zero working credit cards and only a few crumpled $20 bills in their designer purses, they could not even afford the cheapest standard room. The clerk took pity on them and allowed them to sit in the motel lobby. Marcus paused for dramatic effect. Your mother and sister, wearing their ruined designer dresses and covered in sweat, are currently sleeping on cheap, uncomfortable vinyl chairs in a dingy motel lobby. They are sharing a single vending machine blanket and guarding their luggage in a room that smells heavily of chlorine and stale coffee. I thanked Marcus for his exceptional investigative work and ended the call. I walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my beachfront mansion and looked out at the dark, crashing waves. Somewhere on this island, my mother and sister were shivering in a cheap motel, completely stripped of their fake wealth, their unearned status, and their toxic arrogance. They had deliberately tried to leave me in the dark, but they were the ones who ended up lost, completely broke, and entirely alone. I raised my cold glass of sparkling water to the empty room, making a silent, triumphant toast to the incredible power of undeniable truth. The long, pathetic walk of shame was finally absolutely complete for them tonight. I placed my empty glass on the marble kitchen island and watched the digital clock on my oven tick past midnight. The house was swathed in complete silence, a stark contrast to the absolute chaos I had unleashed upon Martha's Vineyard. My phone, which had been buzzing relentlessly for hours, with desperate pleas from my mother and sister, had finally gone quiet. I assumed their phone batteries had died, or they had simply surrendered to their miserable fate on those cheap vinyl chairs in the motel lobby. I was just about to head upstairs to my bedroom when the screen illuminated the dark room with a single sharp notification. It was a new text message, but it was not from my mother or my sister. The sender's name displayed clearly on the bright screen. It was Harrison. I unlocked the device and opened the message, genuinely curious about what my arrogant brother-in-law could possibly have to say after his entire world had crumbled to dust. The text was lengthy, desperately typed, and completely devoid of his usual old money arrogance. He was panicking. "Kendra, we seriously need to talk privately," the message began. "I know things got completely out of hand today at the estate, but we are both rational, business-minded professionals. My father is currently having a total breakdown, and our company is literally days away from absolute bankruptcy. I understand you are angry with your sister and your mother. Frankly, I am absolutely furious with them as well. Simone completely lied to me about her family's wealth. She is a fraud, and I am officially done with her." I raised my eyebrows, reading the digital betrayal unfolding on my screen. Harrison was actively throwing his own wife under the proverbial bus to save his own skin. I did not reply immediately, letting him sweat in the agonizing silence. A few minutes later, 3 tiny typing bubbles appeared on my screen, followed by another massive block of text. "Kendra, listen to me," Harrison continued. "I will file for divorce from Simone first thing tomorrow morning. I will completely cut her off and throw her out onto the street. I will publicly humiliate her in front of all her elite social circles. I will give you the ultimate satisfaction of watching her lose the prestigious marriage she constantly brags about. I will completely destroy her reputation. All I ask in return is that you approve the $50 million corporate bailout for Sterling Logistics and Freight. You hold the power at Apex Equity. You can save my family's legacy. If you authorize the cash injection, I will personally guarantee that Simone never bothers you ever again. We can make a mutually beneficial arrangement right now. Just say the word." I stared at the glowing screen, utterly disgusted by the sheer, unadulterated cowardice of his proposal. Harrison had spent the entire weekend looking down his nose at me, mocking my career and complaining that my presence would embarrass his sophisticated parents. He had married my sister because he thought she possessed the immense social capital and financial backing required to save his sinking shipping empire. The very second he realized she was broke and that I held the actual power, he was instantly willing to trade her away, like a cheap disposable commodity. There was absolutely no loyalty, no love, and no honor in his heart. He was nothing more than a desperate, pathetic parasite clinging to the last shred of his generational wealth. I did not want his ridiculous corporate deal, and I certainly had no intention of ever approving his bailout. But I did want to ensure that my sister saw exactly who she had married. Simone had spent years treating me like absolute garbage, believing that her proximity to whiteness and old money made her vastly superior to my corporate lifestyle. She needed to witness the brutal, unfiltered reality of her perfect marriage. I placed my thumb simultaneously on the power and volume buttons of my phone, taking a high-resolution screenshot of his entire treacherous message. I captured every single word, including his explicit offer to publicly destroy and discard his wife in exchange for $50 million. I opened a new message thread directed to Simone. I attached the crisp, undeniable screenshot of Harrison's betrayal. I did not include a long, emotional paragraph. I did not offer any sisterly sympathy or comforting words. I simply typed a single devastating sentence to accompany the image. "Here is the prestigious, high-caliber husband you sacrificed my mental health to secure." I pressed send and watched the delivery confirmation appear instantly. Less than 30 seconds later, my phone began to vibrate violently in my palm. Simone was calling. I pressed the accept button, bringing the speaker to my ear. I was immediately greeted by a sound I had never heard from her before. It was not her usual performative whining or her angry, entitled screaming. It was a guttural, agonizing wail of pure, unadulterated heartbreak. The sound of her entire, carefully constructed universe shattering into a million sharp, jagged pieces. "Tell me this is a fake screenshot!" Simone screamed through her intense, racking sobs. "Kendra, please tell me you fabricated this to punish me. Harrison would never say these horrible things. He loves me. We are going to build a life together. Tell me you maliciously manipulated this awful text message. I did not fabricate a single letter, Simone. I replied, my voice steady, cold, and completely devoid of pity. Your perfect husband sent that proposal to me just 5 minutes ago. He is currently begging me to save his bankrupt family company, and he is eagerly using your impending divorce as his absolute primary bargaining chip to secure his own financial survival today. He never truly loved you, Simone. He only loved the limitless credit card you fraudulently provided. You are completely worthless to his family without my money. Face the harsh, brutal reality now. I pressed the red button to end the call, cutting off the pathetic sound of my sister's relentless sobbing. I tossed my cell phone onto the glass coffee table and took a deep breath of the cool ocean air. The absolute silence of my beautiful beachfront estate was a profoundly welcome contrast to the chaotic emotional wreckage I had just engineered. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt for shattering Simone's superficial marriage. She had constructed her identity around a man who viewed her as a convenient financial stepping stone. I handed her the unvarnished truth. Before I could stand up to pour myself another glass of sparkling water, my phone illuminated the darkened room once again. A new audio message notification appeared on the lock screen. It was a 3-minute voicemail from my mother, Beatrice. I leaned forward, tapped the screen, and placed the audio on the external speaker. I wanted to hear exactly how she planned to manipulate her entire way out of this disaster. Sasha, how could you possibly do this to your own mother? Beatrice began, her voice quivering with a manufactured blend of sorrow and maternal indignation. I am standing in the freezing lobby of a disgusting motel, and the clerk is looking at me like a common criminal. You have completely humiliated our family today. We are strong, proud Black women. We are supposed to stick together when facing the world. You are actively destroying our carefully built legacy over a simple misunderstanding. What will the women in my sorority say? What will the country club board members think when they hear you abandoned your own mother on an island? I listened to her ridiculous speech with clinical detachment. She was actively attempting to weaponize our racial identity and cultural solidarity to guilt me into submission. She wanted to invoke the sacred concept of Black family loyalty, completely ignoring the fact that she had ruthlessly thrown me to the wolves whenever it suited her social ambitions. You need to fix this right now, Sasha. My mother continued, her tone shifting from a pathetic whine to a demanding bark. You must hire a private car to take us to the ferry tomorrow morning. You need to unlock that platinum credit card immediately so I can pay for a decent hotel room tonight. I also need to make the monthly lease payment on my Range Rover by tomorrow afternoon, or the dealership will apply a late fee. You are disrespecting your elders, and God will punish you for treating your family with such unprecedented cruelty. Call me back the exact second you hear this message. The voicemail ended with a sharp, echoing beep. I let out a harsh, dry laugh that bounced off the vaulted ceilings of my living room. She was entirely delusional. Even after being publicly humiliated, stripped of her fake wealth, and abandoned by the wealthy white family she worshipped, she still believed she possessed the authority to issue demands. She still believed I would obediently fall back into my designated role as the quiet, compliant financial sponsor. I picked up my laptop from the adjacent armchair and opened my secure email client. I was absolutely finished engaging in these exhausting, toxic verbal arguments. It was time to establish rigid, impenetrable legal boundaries. I drafted a formal communication directed to my mother and copied my personal retaining attorney on the message. I kept the language incredibly cold, legally binding, and devoid of any familial warmth. Beatrice, I typed, refusing to use the title of mother. This email serves as your final official warning. You no longer have any authorization to access my personal or corporate financial accounts. The Platinum credit card has been permanently destroyed. If you attempt to use my name, my social security number, or my corporate affiliations to secure any future lines of credit, I will immediately press criminal charges for identity theft and financial fraud. Do not call my phone again. Do not send me any more manipulative voicemails. I paused, my fingers hovering over the glowing keyboard as I remembered the specific demand she had made at the end of her audio message. She was worried about the monthly payment for her luxury Range Rover. That pristine imported vehicle was her ultimate status symbol in Atlanta. She drove it to every single charity luncheon and high society gathering to project an image of effortless wealth. What she continually failed to acknowledge was that the vehicle was not leased under her name. Because her personal credit score was completely ruined from years of reckless spending, she had begged me to lease the vehicle under my corporate holding company. I opened a new browser tab and navigated directly to the automotive finance portal. I logged into the corporate account and located the active lease agreement for her specific vehicle. She had been driving that expensive car for 2 years, treating it as her own personal property, completely oblivious to the fact that I held the absolute legal power to revoke her driving privileges at any given moment. I clicked on the payment management settings. I firmly selected the option to permanently cancel all future automatic transfers. But simply stopping the payments was not enough of a consequence. I wanted to ensure she understood the absolute finality of my decision. I navigated to the vehicle tracking and management dashboard. Because the vehicle was a corporate asset, I had the administrative ability to report the car as an unauthorized possession. I submitted a formal request to the leasing agency, officially revoking Beatrice's authorization to operate the corporate vehicle and triggering an immediate repossession protocol to recover the asset from her Atlanta driveway. I switched back to the email draft and added one final paragraph. Furthermore, the corporate lease for the Range Rover parked at your residence has been revoked. The dealership has been notified to repossess the vehicle. Purchase a bus pass. Enjoy the walk home. I hit send. The satisfying chime of the sent email echoed in the quiet living room, signaling the absolute end of my mother's luxurious facade. I closed the laptop, finally allowing myself to sink into the plush cushions of my sofa, and slept more soundly than I had in over a decade. The next morning, I woke up to a stunning sunrise over the Atlantic Ocean, completely undisturbed by the usual frantic demands of my toxic relatives. As I brewed a fresh pot of artisanal coffee, my tablet chimed with a new security notification. It was not from the Martha's Vineyard estate. The alert originated from the comprehensive surveillance system I had installed at the primary family residence back in Atlanta. My mother had always proudly claimed that sprawling brick manor was the ultimate symbol of her hard work and social climbing. She paraded her elite associates through those halls, boasting about the custom chandeliers and the imported Italian marble countertops. What she conveniently forgot to mention to her wealthy friends was that when her extravagant spending almost caused a bank foreclosure 3 years ago, I was the one who quietly purchased the property through a blind corporate trust to save her from public embarrassment. She had been living there rent-free ever since, entirely subsidized by the daughter she constantly belittled. I carried my coffee to the kitchen island and pulled up the live security feed. Before sleeping, I had taken one final step to secure my assets. I had remotely activated the digital lockdown protocol on the Atlanta property. Every smart lock on the exterior doors was reprogrammed with a new passcode. The garage doors were electronically disabled. The alarm was armed. They left me alone in that house for the holiday weekend, assuming I would wait for their triumphant return. Now, they were going to find themselves permanently locked out of the fortress they used to project their fake supremacy. I glanced at the timeline reported by Marcus earlier that morning. After spending a sleepless night shivering in the motel lobby, my mother and sister had been forced to face the reality of their newly bankrupt status. With their credit cards frozen and Harrison's family ignoring their desperate pleas, they had to scrape together the last crumpled bills from their designer purses to afford passage off the island. They could not afford the luxury ferry they had flaunted. Instead, they boarded the standard budget commuter ferry at the crack of dawn. I could easily picture them sitting on the hard plastic seats, surrounded by noisy tourists and crying children, wearing wrinkled evening gowns from the disastrous night before. Their carefully curated illusion of untouchable elite wealth had been violently stripped away, leaving behind two bitter, exhausted women facing a long, humiliating journey back to Georgia. I kept the security feed open on my secondary monitor while I reviewed my corporate portfolios. At exactly 2 in the afternoon, a standard yellow taxi pulled up to the curb of the Atlanta estate. The luxury sport utility vehicle was already gone, having been efficiently repossessed by the dealership early that morning just as I had instructed. The taxi driver impatiently popped the trunk, dumped their massive heavy suitcases onto the concrete sidewalk, and immediately sped away. Beatrice and Simone stood on the sidewalk looking absolutely defeated. Their hair was a messy, tangled disaster. Their posture was completely slumped. The arrogant, triumphant energy they had radiated in their social media videos just a few days ago was entirely extinguished. I watched through the high-definition porch camera as my mother dragged her heavy luggage up the brick steps, panting heavily from the immense physical exertion. She reached into her handbag and pulled out her brass key, completely oblivious to the glowing red indicator light on the digital smart lock above the doorknob. She jammed the key into the cylinder and tried to turn it, but the internal mechanism refused to budge. She jiggled the handle aggressively, her face contorting in pure frustration. Simone trudged up the steps right behind her, complaining loudly about the sweltering afternoon heat and her sore feet. My mother punched her usual 4-digit passcode into the digital keypad. The system immediately flashed a bright red error message and emitted a loud, sharp warning beep. She typed the code again, pressing the buttons with increasing violence. The red light flashed once more. I turned up the volume on the security feed to hear their frantic conversation clearly. "What is wrong with this stupid door?" Beatrice yelled violently, kicking the bottom of the heavy oak frame with her scuffed designer heel. The maid must have messed with the security system before she left for the holiday. Simone, try your access code right now. Simone dropped her heavy bags and angrily punched her personal code into the keypad. The exact same red error light flashed, followed by a harsh, denying beep. "It is not working, Mom," Simone whined, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Just call Kendra and tell her to open the front door from the inside. She has been sitting in this house all weekend doing absolutely nothing anyway." My mother pulled her cell phone from her purse, her hands shaking with rage. She dialed my number, and my phone immediately lit up on the kitchen counter. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. I watched the camera feed as my mother lowered the phone, a look of profound, creeping realization slowly washing over her tired face. She looked down at the empty driveway where her luxury vehicle was supposed to be parked. She looked at the blinking red light of the newly reprogrammed smart lock. And then she finally remembered the cold, legally binding email I had sent her the previous night. She suddenly realized that the daughter she had abandoned had not just frozen the credit cards. I had finally taken back absolutely everything that rightfully belonged to me today. The game was completely over for them. The news of a monumental social collapse travels faster than a private jet, especially within the highly exclusive circles of Atlanta high society. I sat on the balcony of my Martha's Vineyard estate, watching the gentle ocean waves, while my phone screen lit up with a relentless stream of notifications. The incredibly tight-knit networks of Jack and Jill and the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority alumni were absolutely buzzing. In a community where your entire worth is heavily dictated by generational wealth, prestigious affiliations, and an untouchable public image, my mother and sister had just committed the ultimate unforgivable sin. They had been exposed as complete frauds. The spectacular implosion of their carefully curated illusion began almost immediately after they were left stranded on the sidewalk outside my locked Atlanta mansion. I poured myself a glass of iced tea and opened the various social media applications on my tablet. The elite circles they had spent decades manipulating were not kind to those who lost their status. It started with a subtle whisper network. Harrison's wealthy parents, absolutely furious over the humiliating eviction and the terrifying realization of their own financial ruin, did not stay quiet. Caroline had immediately contacted her elite friends in Boston, who quickly relayed the juicy gossip to their affluent connections in Georgia. The story was simple but devastating. Beatrice and Simone were entirely broke, living off a stolen credit card, and had just been thrown out of a $12 million beachfront property. My mother desperately attempted to perform damage control the very next morning. She borrowed a cheap compact rental car and drove to the most important social event of her entire month. It was the annual Jack and Jill Alumni Charity Luncheon, hosted at a highly exclusive country club in Buckhead. She planned to walk in with her head held high, ready to spin a flawless narrative about a minor misunderstanding with a rogue property manager. She thought she could easily smile her way out of the crisis. However, the country club manager intercepted her, the absolute second she stepped through the grand glass doors. He politely but firmly informed her that her annual membership dues had bounced due to a frozen credit card. He also mentioned that the event organizers had explicitly requested she not be admitted to the private dining room. Through my vast network of corporate colleagues who also navigated those elite circles, I received a detailed play-by-play account of the humiliating scene. My mother demanded to speak with the chapter president, a woman she had considered a close personal friend for over 20 years. The president actually walked out to the lobby, looked my mother directly in the eyes, and coldly stated that the organization could not afford to associate with individuals involved in active financial fraud. The president explicitly cited the unpaid $4,500 seafood bill from Martha's Vineyard, a story that had already become legendary gossip. My mother stripped of her platinum card, and her dignity was forced to turn around and walk out of the country club, while dozens of her former friends watched in absolute judgmental silence. While my mother was being ousted from her beloved country club, my sister Simone was facing her own spectacular, incredibly painful social execution. Simone had built her entire personality around her prestigious Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority status. She used her sorority connections to secure brand deals, luxury event invitations, and her elevated social media following. But the sorority network was fiercely protective of its pristine reputation. One of her sorority sisters, who worked closely with the property management firm in Martha's Vineyard, had seen the eviction reports, the damning information, including the frantic, humiliating walk to the cheap coastal motel, was swiftly dropped into their massive, highly active group chat. Simone tried to go on the offensive. She logged into her social media accounts and posted a long, tearful video claiming that she was the victim of a cruel, vindictive sister who had stolen her inheritance. She expected an outpouring of sympathy, support, and fierce loyalty from her sorority sisters. Instead, the comment section immediately turned into a brutal, unforgiving battlefield. The women she had spent years looking down upon, the women she had mocked for not wearing designer labels or marrying wealthy men, completely destroyed her false narrative. They demanded to know why she was driving a repossessed vehicle and why her husband had publicly abandoned her. They called out her immense hypocrisy and her blatant, disgusting materialism. Within a matter of hours, Simone was officially removed from the sorority alumni board. Her luxury brand sponsors, alerted by the sudden influx of negative attention and the shocking rumors of financial insolvency, began canceling her influencer contracts one by one. The glamorous, untouchable lifestyle she had ruthlessly sacrificed my mental health to achieve was completely evaporating before her very eyes. She had nothing left. The rich, powerful husband she had bragged about was actively drafting divorce papers. The elite friends she had prioritized over her own blood were now openly mocking her spectacular downfall. My phone buzzed again, breaking my intense concentration. It was a new text message from an unknown number, but the desperate pleading tone was unmistakably from my mother. She must have purchased a cheap prepaid phone just to contact me. "Kendra, please," the message read. "We have absolutely nowhere to go. My friends have turned their backs on me. The sorority has abandoned Simone. We are currently sitting in a cheap diner because we cannot even access the Atlanta house. You have proven your point. You have won the game. Please, I am begging you on my hands and knees, just let us back inside the house. We have completely lost everything." I read the message twice, feeling a deep sense of peace wash over me. I did not feel pity for them. I permanently blocked the unknown number and calmly turned my face toward the warm, bright morning sun. The warm, bright morning sun felt like a golden crown resting upon my shoulders. I enjoyed the peaceful ocean breeze for exactly 10 more minutes before transitioning back into my professional reality. The weekend was officially over. Wednesday morning had arrived, and the corporate execution I had promised was on the schedule. I flew back to Atlanta on my private charter jet, heading straight from the tarmac to the towering glass skyscraper that housed Apex Equity. I walked through the double-glass doors of the executive suite, wearing a sharp, tailored black suit that projected absolute authority. My dedicated assistant Marcus was already waiting at my pristine desk with a thick leather-bound dossier. The heavy file was clearly labeled with the name Sterling Logistics and Freight. The time for childish games, pathetic illusions, and desperate social climbing was permanently over. It was finally time for a complete, merciless corporate liquidation. I sat behind my massive mahogany desk, opened the file, and picked up my heavy gold fountain pen. I reviewed the final default notices. Winston and his arrogant family had completely failed to secure any alternative funding after I denied their $50 million bailout package. I smirked. Their temporary grace period had officially expired at 9 o'clock this morning. I signed my name on the dotted line of the asset seizure authorization form. The sharp, crisp strokes of my pen effectively ended a 70-year-old Boston dynasty in a matter of seconds. I handed the signed documents back to Marcus. I instructed him to immediately dispatch our aggressive corporate recovery team directly to Boston. I did not want a slow, drawn-out bankruptcy process. I wanted a swift, total, and highly public liquidation of every single asset attached to the Sterling family name. Within 2 hours, a team of ruthlessly efficient corporate lawyers and armed private security personnel descended upon the Sterling Logistics headquarters. They proudly escorted Winston out of his corner office, confiscating his corporate laptop and physically seizing the entire building. The real devastation, however, was applied to their physical assets. I personally oversaw the rapid auction of their remaining commercial shipping fleet. The massive cargo ships they had foolishly purchased on credit were sold for pennies on the dollar to massive international competitors. The proceeds barely covered the interest on their outstanding loans. But I absolutely did not stop at their corporate holdings. Because Winston had recklessly used his personal generational wealth as collateral to secure those failing business loans. Everything he owned was completely fair game. I ordered the immediate seizure of their personal luxury assets. The 90-foot yacht that Harrison had constantly used to lure superficial women like my sister into his toxic orbit was officially impounded by federal maritime authorities at the crowded marina. I authorized a rapid, absolute fire sale of their historic, multi-million-dollar Boston brownstone. The sprawling estate that had been in Caroline's family for 4 generations was sold to a newly wealthy tech billionaire within 48 hours. They were given a single afternoon to pack whatever personal belongings they could fit into cheap cardboard boxes before the new owner completely changed the locks. Even their exclusive, generational country club memberships were aggressively liquidated and directly transferred to cover their rapidly mounting legal debts. The elite social standing they had fiercely weaponized to make others feel inferior was entirely stripped away. They were left with absolutely nothing. No company, no mansions, no yachts, and no prestigious legacy to hide behind. They were completely, utterly, and undeniably bankrupt in every single conceivable way today. Fantastic. Later that afternoon, my office phone rang with a direct call from my lead recovery attorney in Boston. He quickly informed me that Harrison had desperately attempted to bargain with the ruthless liquidation team. Harrison had shamelessly offered to hand over his expensive sports cars and a collection of vintage watches if the firm would just allow him to keep his luxury downtown condominium. He was literally sobbing in the public lobby of his former corporate headquarters, completely broken and publicly humiliated. I told my attorney to seize the shiny watches to the sports cars and proceed with the immediate foreclosure of the expensive condominium. There would be absolutely no mercy, no compromises, and no comfortable safety nets for a man who had treated my very existence as a disgusting social liability. I stood up from my desk and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sprawling Atlanta skyline. The absolute contrast between my reality and theirs was completely breathtaking. While Winston, Caroline, and Harrison were currently standing on a cold Boston sidewalk, holding cheap cardboard boxes filled with the pathetic remnants of their ruined lives, I was actively expanding my multi-billion-dollar financial empire today. They had built their entire identity around the fragile, superficial illusion of old money supremacy. I had built my permanent reality on relentless hard work, sharp intellect, an undeniable financial strategy. The brutal liquidation of the Sterling family was not just a routine corporate transaction for me. It was the ultimate undeniable proof that pure character and intense competence will always outlast unearned privilege and toxic arrogance. They had constantly looked down on my practical business suits and my deep dedication to my career. They had viciously mocked my quiet lifestyle and excluded me from their glamorous coastal celebrations. Now my private equity firm legally owned the very designer shoes on their feet. The massive generational wealth that had completely shielded them from facing any real consequence for decades was totally erased from the earth. I slowly turned back to my wooden desk, closed the thick sterling file, and calmly placed it directly into the secure shredder bin. They were officially liquidated, permanently ruined, and completely erased from my professional radar. The heavy burden of their toxic existence was finally gone, and I could entirely focus on enjoying the limitless, beautiful future I had constructed with my own hands. Glorious. The glorious feeling of absolute victory washed over me, but I knew my work was not entirely finished. Financial ruin and social exile were severe punishments, but they did not guarantee permanent peace. Toxic people rarely accept defeat with grace. They usually cling to their perceived victims, desperately searching for a new angle to exploit or a hidden vulnerability to manipulate. I knew my mother and sister would eventually try to crawl back into my life once the initial shock of their poverty wore off. They would try to weaponize fake apologies, manufactured health emergencies, or holiday guilt to force their way back into my luxurious reality. I absolutely refused to leave a single door unlocked for them. I picked up my office telephone and dialed the direct extension for my personal retaining attorney, Victoria. She was a ruthless, brilliant litigator who specialized in high net worth family disputes and asset protection. I had scheduled an appointment with her earlier that morning, and she was already waiting in the executive conference room down the hall. I walked out of my office carrying a slim leather folder containing my final set of demands. When I entered the glass-walled conference room, Victoria stood up and greeted me with a firm professional handshake. We sat down at the long mahogany table overlooking the bustling city streets far below us. I want to establish a permanent, legally binding no-contact order against Beatrice and Simone Davis. I instructed, my voice completely devoid of any emotional hesitation. I do not want a temporary injunction. I want a comprehensive ironclad cease and desist directive accompanied by a formal restraining order. They are not allowed to contact my personal phone, my corporate email, or my physical addresses. They are legally barred from stepping foot within 500 yards of my Atlanta residence, my Martha's Vineyard estate, and this corporate headquarters. Victoria nodded sharply, taking detailed notes on her legal pad. Given the documented financial fraud your mother committed using your corporate accounts and the highly publicized trespassing incident at your coastal property, securing a judge's approval for this level of restriction will be incredibly straightforward, she explained. We will frame this as a necessary measure to protect your corporate assets and your personal safety from individuals with a proven history of volatile, financially destructive behavior. I have already drafted the initial paperwork based on your earlier requests. I just need your signature on these affidavits. She slid a thick stack of legal documents across the polished table. I picked up the pen and began signing my name on the designated lines. With every single stroke of the ink, I felt a massive, suffocating weight lifting off my chest. I was not just signing legal forms today. I was officially signing my own emancipation papers. I was legally severing the toxic parasitic umbilical cord that had drained my energy, my finances, and my self-esteem for over 3 decades. When I finished signing the final page, I handed the stack back to Victoria. She assured me that process servers would deliver the documents to my mother and sister by the end of the business day. I returned to my private office and sat quietly in my chair. The silence in the room allowed me to deeply reflect on the profound generational trauma I was actively dismantling. In the highly competitive, image-obsessed world of the Black elite, familial roles are often rigidly assigned and ruthlessly enforced. My mother had grown up desperate for social validation, desperately trying to prove her worth to a society that constantly judged her. Or instead of healing her own deep insecurities, she simply passed them down to the next generation. She transformed our family into a toxic pageant. Simone was crowned the golden child, the beautiful, superficial extension of my mother's unfulfilled ambitions. I was designated as the scapegoat. I was the dark-skinned, serious, academically driven daughter who did not fit their frivolous high society aesthetic. I was the emotional dumping ground for their insecurities. They needed me to be the boring, unsuccessful failure so they could feel superior about their own shallow achievements. They deliberately clipped my wings because they were absolutely terrified of how high I could fly. By accepting my role as the financial provider who stayed hidden in the shadows, I had unknowingly enabled their abusive cycle. I had allowed them to siphon my resources while simultaneously disrespecting my existence. But the cycle was completely broken now. I had stepped out of the dark shadow and burned their entire stage to the ground. I refused to pass this bitter, agonizing trauma down to my own future children. I refused to let anyone in my bloodline ever feel like a secondary character in their own life. By legally banishing Beatrice and Simone, I was fiercely protecting my own peace and preserving the integrity of the empire I had built. I was choosing my own mental health over the dangerous, highly manipulative concept of unconditional family loyalty. Blood does not give anyone the right to abuse you. At exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon, my phone chimed with a secure message from Victoria. The process servers had successfully delivered the no-contact orders. My mother and sister had been served the legal documents while attempting to apply for a subprime lease at a used car dealership on the outskirts of Atlanta. The visual image of their absolute humiliation brought a genuine peaceful smile to my face. The legal wall was officially erected. They could not call me. They could not visit me. They could not beg for my forgiveness. They were permanently locked outside my universe. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and felt completely whole. My soul was finally clean. I opened my eyes and looked out at the sprawling city skyline, knowing that my brilliant future was entirely mine to command. The heavy storms were over and a brand new bright chapter had just beautifully begun. A full year has passed since that unforgettable morning on the balcony, and the salty breeze of Martha's Vineyard feels more invigorating than ever. Today is Labor Day weekend, marking the exact anniversary of the spectacular implosion of my toxic family's grand illusion. Unlike last year, my sprawling beachfront estate in Oak Bluffs is not occupied by desperate frauds trying to secure a corporate bailout. Instead, the property is buzzing with the vibrant, joyful energy of my chosen family. I am hosting a massive catered end-of-summer celebration for my closest friends, trusted corporate colleagues, and the brilliant junior partners at Apex Equity, who helped me navigate the Sterling Logistics liquidation. A live jazz band is playing softly on the cedar deck, blending perfectly with the rhythmic sound of the crashing ocean waves. My personal chef, Marcus's talented brother, is grilling fresh local seafood while a bartender mixes custom cocktails by the infinity pool. I am wearing a stunning custom-tailored white linen jumpsuit, holding a glass of crisp, sparkling water and watching the people who genuinely support me enjoy the incredible sanctuary I built entirely from my own relentless hard work. The atmosphere is incredibly relaxed, completely devoid of the suffocating performative tension that defined every single event my mother ever orchestrated. I am casually chatting with a prominent tech investor from Boston when my assistant Marcus walks over with a bright, knowing smile spreading across his face. He hands me his personal smartphone, tapping the glowing screen with one finger. "You might want to see this highly entertaining update," Marcus suggests, his voice laced with pure amusement. I politely excuse myself from the conversation and look down at the device. It is an Instagram story posted by a mutual acquaintance from our old hometown in Georgia. The short video clip shows the interior of a highly outdated, brightly lit fast food franchise located somewhere deep in the Atlanta suburbs. The camera pans across the greasy linoleum floor and zooms in directly on the checkout counter. Standing there wearing a poorly fitted, bright polyester uniform and a deeply humiliating paper visor is my younger sister Simone. She is aggressively scrubbing a sticky soda spill off the cheap plastic counter, looking absolutely miserable and entirely exhausted. The glamorous, untouchable influencer persona she once paraded around the internet has been entirely erased from existence. I watched the video loop 3 times, absorbing every single tragic detail of her monumental downfall. According to the lengthy caption typed across the bottom of the short video clip, Simone has been working double shifts at this minimum wage job just to afford the basic rent for a tiny rundown studio apartment she now shares with our mother. After Harrison formally served her with incredibly aggressive divorce papers, he utterly destroyed her in the subsequent legal proceedings. Because Simone possessed absolutely zero personal assets, no legitimate career history, and had actively participated in massive financial deception. The presiding judge awarded her absolutely nothing from the Sterling family estate. Furthermore, she was left solely responsible for the massive crushing debt she had recklessly accumulated under her own name, while desperately trying to maintain her fake luxury lifestyle during their brief marriage. My mother, Beatrice, fared no better in the harsh light of absolute reality. After being permanently exiled from all her prestigious social clubs and officially ousted by her former sorority network, she was forced to declare immediate personal bankruptcy. Without my corporate credit card to blindly fund her daily delusions, her entire elite world instantly evaporated into thin air. The courtroom proceedings that followed their island eviction were nothing short of a spectacular public execution. Through my legal connections, I received detailed transcripts of both Harrison's divorce filing and my mother's bankruptcy hearings. Harrison, completely devoid of his old money charm, unleashed a team of vicious corporate lawyers against Simone. In her absolute desperation to marry into a wealthy white family and elevate her social standing, Simone had enthusiastically signed an ironclad prenuptial agreement without bothering to have a lawyer read it. She assumed it was merely a formality of the ultra-rich. During the divorce hearing, she tearfully demanded spousal support and half of a non-existent real estate portfolio. The judge practically laughed her out of the courtroom when Harrison's attorneys presented the hard evidence. The Sterling family was completely insolvent, and Simone's own financial contribution to the marriage was built entirely on a frozen credit card belonging to her estranged sister. She was brutally dismissed from the courtroom with zero alimony, zero assets, and a massive legal bill she had no feasible way to pay. Beatrice's downfall in bankruptcy court was even more poetic. She attempted to hide her jewelry and claimed that the antique furniture in the Atlanta house belonged to her. However, the bankruptcy trustee, armed with the meticulous corporate ledgers I had provided, swiftly dismantled her lies. Every single designer watch, diamond necklace, and luxury vehicle was traced back to my corporate accounts. Because she had fraudulently claimed these assets as her own collateral for various country club loans, the judge ordered the immediate seizure of her few remaining personal possessions to appease her aggressive creditors. She stood in front of the magistrate, stripped of her designer gowns, wearing a cheap, off-the-rack suit she had bought from a discount department store, the exact type of clothing she used to mercilessly mock me for wearing. Her tears held no power in a room governed by cold, hard numbers. The legal system did not care about her pageant titles or her sorority connections. They only cared about the undeniable fact that she was a deeply indebted fraud. I hand the smartphone directly back to Marcus, offering a deeply satisfied smile. The profound sense of justice is incredibly sweet, far more fulfilling than any verbal apology they could ever offer me. They had spent my entire childhood demanding absolute perfection while treating my existence as a severe social liability. They aggressively mocked my professional ambitions and repeatedly prioritized their toxic vanity over basic human decency. They chose to build their identities around empty aesthetics and stolen wealth. Now they are finally experiencing the real world, a harsh landscape where actions carry permanent consequences and credit card bills must be paid using honest labor. I turn my attention back toward the lively party currently unfolding on my beautiful patio. My guests are laughing loudly, sharing amazing stories, and genuinely supporting one another. The sharp contrast between my current reality and the miserable life my mother and sister are enduring is totally staggering. I feel completely liberated, entirely detached from the generational trauma that once actively suffocated my potential. I am no longer the scapegoat designated to carry their insecurities. I am the absolute victor who successfully reclaimed her power and thoroughly rewrote her destiny. As the afternoon slowly transitions into a glorious golden evening, I take a quiet moment to walk down the wooden steps toward my private stretch of pristine beach. The cool sand feels wonderfully soft beneath my bare feet. I stare out across the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, reflecting on the spectacular journey that brought me to this exact point in time. The highly toxic, arrogant relatives who once relentlessly tried to artificially diminish my brilliant light are now entirely powerless and utterly broken. They have been permanently banished to the bleak, uncomfortable shadows they desperately tried to force me into. My private equity firm continues to thrive at an unprecedented rate, and my personal real estate portfolio expands globally every single quarter. I have successfully surrounded myself with brilliant, authentic individuals who value my intellect and celebrate my outstanding achievements. The sweet revenge I secured was never about seeking petty vengeance or causing unnecessary harm. It was always about demanding basic respect and establishing impenetrable boundaries. I raise my glass toward the setting sun, offering a completely silent, triumphant toast to the absolute beauty of total independence. The incredibly toxic game is permanently over, and I have spectacularly won absolutely everything I ever truly wanted in this life.